Right, well today we've got a really nice little project on the bench. That's a Seagull Model 40, 40 plus I think it is, and it was made between 1956 and 1957. At the moment it's a non-runner, hopefully it won't be that way for very long. Absolutely beautiful piece of work. It's got all these nice touches like that lovely engraving on the top of it there. On the flywheel, you've got a nice dinky little carburetor look. There's a few issues that are pretty obvious with it, like that throttle cable's going to need replacing. That's all loose and the tube's gone hard, so obviously the fuel system's going to need looking at. I've no idea when it last ran, so we've got all the necessary fluids. We've got 140 gear oil there and some 2-stroke oil. I'm not going to just put fuel in it and just try and start it and run it up. I'm actually going to take a few things apart just to make sure we're okay. I'm going to check the points, and I'm going to also have a look at inside that carburetor and make sure it's not gummed up and that the jets are clear. We're going to clean things up in general, and then we'll have a go at starting it. So let's see how we get on with that then. Well, we stripped it down, which took about 30 seconds to be honest. Very easy. I've put a bit of oil and petrol, mixed probably about 50-50, into the air intake and down the spark plug hole, and gently turned it over for a minute or two just to make sure everything was nice and free in there so it didn't cause any damage. We put a rope on it and gave it a really good tug. I'd like to show you that, but I can't because I haven't got anyone to hold the camera for me. But basically, by holding the spark plug against the side of the block like that, we can see we've got a really nice fat spark there. So the ignition system's actually in quite good order. So this is looking good so far. Let's see how we get on with the carburetor next, I think. That's the carburetor, all in pieces. We're looking good so far. We've checked that needle valve's working, and it is. I checked that by simply blowing down the hole there to see if I could shut it off with my finger, and it did. The jets look quite clear. I don't think you'll see it with this, but if I look down I can actually see daylight through there, and there's no gunk or sludge in there, so I think we'll just clean that out with some petrol and see how we get on. I don't know what I'm going to do about this cable. This is a bit special. We've got a little tiny nipple on the end there, and I've got to use the fittings off the end. I can buy the actual thing, and I think it's about £14 to buy it, but I'll see if I can make one out of some cable we've got lying around. In the meantime, while we're doing that, we're draining the oil out of the gearbox, and you can see that's really quite unpleasant, nasty looking emulsion, stinky goo, and it doesn't come out too quickly. We just got to leave it to drip. It's quite thick stuff. Here I've opened up the magneto casing to make sure everything's okay in there. You can see the points there. Nice little touch. It's held where there's a little brass cover over those, held with a spring clip. Keep things nice and clean and water out. Strangely, that gap is supposed to be 20 thousandths of an inch, but as I turn this flywheel, I don't actually see the points moving at all, so goodness knows how we got a spark out of it. So I think they do need adjustment. We'll look at that next. Okay, I think I found why it didn't run. Surprisingly, the nut on the end of the shaft came off very easily, and the flywheel also popped off quite easily, and I was pretty amazed to find there's no key in it, so it wouldn't have had any ignition timing. I've got a feeling what's happened is somebody's put this back together pretty quickly, having lost the key, and sort of given up on it, and that would be why it was a non-runner. Yeah, that's interesting. So I guess we're going to have to make a key for it. Coming along nicely. We've given everything a good clear up with some wire wool and brasso, and made things look a little bit more presentable. That elusive little key for the flywheel I made myself using a little piece of silver steel, well actually quite a big bar of silver steel. So we used that. I ground it up to get just about the right shape, the size I wanted, before I finally took it off the end of the bar. You can see just where I've snapped it off, and then I cleaned it up with the file. So that's a nice cheap easy fix. We will put that very safe because it's small, we don't want to lose that. The next thing I've done is, for this cable, I got an old bike cable, and this was a lot larger. It's actually a very, very small nipple on the end of that, which I've carefully filed down so that now fits in there. And on the other end, what I'll do is I will solder a little piece of brass tube to make the smaller nipple at the end, and then we can file that down to suit. We're going to need a gasket for this gearbox there. That I think we'll probably get out of an old cereal packet or something like that. So I think it's time to start putting some things back together, and we'll also look at giving the tank a coat of paint. I've made a new cable up. If you look very, very carefully, can you see we've got a little tiny brass nipple that I've made up. I just simply turned a bit of brass bar down, drilled a 2mm hole up the middle of it. Might have been 2.5. And the idea is we're going to solder that on there. We've got a flux there already, a bit of easy flow, and I think that should do the trick. Notice that I've put the cable right up close to the vise. The idea is that's going to act as a heat sink and protect the cable from the heat and stop it damaging it. Cable's come out right, as you can see. It fits nicely in both ends there. Hopefully it's the right length. We've got to put this gearbox cover back on now, and when I actually measured the old one and allowed for compression, it appeared that a ready brake packet was just about right. So we'll use a bit of gasket sealer with that, and hopefully that'll be okay then. Time to give the carburetor a bit of attention. We've given it a clean up, again with a bit of wire wool, so it looks a little bit more presentable. I've got an airline and I've blown all those airways out. Well, I say all, there's only two. There's the idle jet down there, the pilot jet, and then there's your main jet under there we've blown out. So in an ideal world you should see daylight through there, and we can, you see. We've made sure that the float floats and hasn't got any holes in it or damage, and needle's nice and straight, doesn't look to be any problems with that. We will check the needle set in that screw at the top. Focus isn't very good. The screw at the top should be just level with the top of this, or one turn above. You can adjust it slightly, but that would be the standard setting. So we'll set that to flush with the top before we put it back together as a benchmark. We're going to start using the light on the camera now. We're running out of daylight. You can see we've got the carburetor back on. The throttle's working absolutely fine, and I think the cable is the right length there. We've got full throttle anyway. A little bit tight maybe. Maybe I should loosen that off a bit. The next step, we've got the gearbox back together, and we've got some EP140 gear oil, and it's got to be EP140 in this. Don't use 90 in one of these. And basically we're just going to keep squirting that in there until it just dribbles out of the front. It's very, very thick stuff, so go slow, because you see it's already dribbling out. You've got to give that time to go down. Well, I've not put the propeller on back yet, because that will make it a bit awkward the way my bench is laid out. I think that's got to go on last, because it's easy to hold it as it is. We've got to the point now. It's a bit dark, but there's a good reason for that. You might just be able to see there we've got the spark plugs set up, all connected. We want to make sure we've got a good spark at this point before we go any further. So if I give this a bit of a yank, you should just be able to see it. And that's what I'm talking about. So we're happy with that. Initially I thought these castings were painted green, but then, silly me, I realised they're actually bronze, which is quite a beautiful metal. So the idea is we want to get that back. So what I've done here, I've mixed up a load of salt, table salt, white vinegar, give it a stir till it dissolves, drop them in there, and then leave them overnight, I think, and tomorrow morning hopefully we'll have nice clean bronze. I might have to put a bit more in, it doesn't quite cover. The bronze has come up quite nicely as expected. He probably didn't need overnight, to be fair. When I had a look at it in the evening, it was looking pretty clean. So we can put that back together. Fuel tank's on. We've Not the best paint job I've ever done in my life. I've given it a coat of wax to help protect it just a little bit. It's functional, it'll do the trick. The top, the cap on there should have a thing underneath it to stop it from falling out and dropping in the water and disappearing forever. We can probably make that with a bit of brazing rod or something like that. Okay, at last this bad boy is ready to run. At least I think it is. We've got a nice new piece of fuel tube there. I've not put the prop on yet because the intention is I can start it and run it for just a few seconds on the bench. It'll be alright without water cooling for that amount of time, but I don't really want to get my shins caught up in a propeller thrashing around there. We've still got to watch that spigot on the end there actually. I've gone for the hotter spark plug because at a 10:1 mix that's going to be pretty smoky engine, I reckon. The tank's all nicely cleaned up. The brackets have cleaned up quite well. One of these little things was missing, but I've turned up a couple of aluminium ones and they seem to work quite well. I've put a decent land on them as well, so hopefully that won't damage the transom too much. And apart from that, I think she's ready to go. There's the engine number. Let's see if we can get a bang out of it. Impressively, it started second pull. You'll just have to take my word for that. I left it for about 2 or 3 minutes. When I came back, to my horror, the bench was absolutely covered in fuel. And when I have a proper look at the tank, in here, you can see where the fuel's reacted with the paint, but we've got 5, at least 5, as much as I can count, pinholes in there. So we've got a leaky tank. Pissed on my chips a bit really, that. I'm so pleased when it started. Right, well this is that leaky Seagull fuel tank. When we put fuel in it, there was like pinholes, well, at least 6 I counted in the bottom of it. The engine did actually run well. I'm very, very pleased with that. But we'd also got a leaking fuel tap as well. Now what I've decided to do is pretty much go back to basics here. I need to know exactly what I've got before I try and fix this. I've looked on the internet at buying new tanks, and I don't think that's feasible, to be honest, because this tank's actually on the surface of it in reasonably good condition. And what I don't want to do is buy another set of problems. So what I've decided to do, we've taken some paint stripper. You see I'm using Nitromorse Original there, which I think is the best thing for just about anything. And I'm using a mixture of wire wool, which I've got there. I'm just scraping the gunk off with a chisel. And the idea is, first of all, I'm going to get rid of all the paint off it, and we want to see exactly what we've got. I'm finding other things on it that could feasibly be pinholes as well, or very nearly about to be pinholes. The initial idea was to put some braze all over it, and I thought if I run some braze in those holes, it'll seal them, but frankly I think there's just too many, and if I start taking a torch to it, I think I'm going to end up with something that looks like lace very, very quickly. So the plan at the moment is to use a tank liner, which is like a liquid you pour inside. We'll see how that goes. We need to get the rest of the paint off this first anyway. Now we've got all the paint off the tank. We can actually see where these pinholes are. Looking up carefully, you can see there's lots and lots of little tiny dents in the surface of this metal. If I turn it over, you can see where the main leaks were. That one was a definite one. And then we've got several more all around the place, like that. And there's quite a few dents there that aren't actually leaking, but I think they're just leaks waiting to happen, to be fair. Now then, I'm not worried about the fuel tap. That's scrapped as far as I'm concerned. So the next part of the process wasn't a problem with that. What I've done, I've cleaned it out, and I used Harpic Power Plus toilet cleaner rather than buy the proper tank cleaner. That toilet cleaner's got various acids in it, which I figured would do the trick. And if you have a look down the hole, you can see it's fairly clean down there now. What I did do was I put some lead musket balls in there and gave that a good shake around as well, and then we left it all overnight to clean up. Oh, there's a few bubbles there I don't like the look of. We left it to clean up overnight, and then gave it a really thorough drying out. I actually put it in the oven for a few hours and made sure we baked it completely dry. Now the product I'm going to use to try and fix this is this stuff, and it's called POR 15. POR stands for paint over rust, I believe, and this is a fuel tank sealer. The idea is you pour it in there, you sluice it round. It's an isocyanate type cure, so it cures actually by moisture. Hence you've got to make sure it's totally dry inside the tank. You don't want it to go off too quickly. You leave it for 96 hours to cure, and hopefully Bob's your uncle. Anyway, we'll see how we get on with this. Well, that's the stuff. And I've got to say that was probably one of the hardest lids I've ever taken off. It's not as thick as I thought it would be. It's actually quite a thin liquid. But the idea now is you're supposed to stir that really well until it's pretty much a uniform colour. So we'll keep on giving it a good stir, and then basically we're going to pour it in there, and then we're going to slowly rotate the tank about to spread it out. When we've done that, we pour any excess out, and then we leave it to dry. Best of luck to us. Well, it's clear a little goes a long way. I've poured it in, I've poured it out. It's probably just under a quarter of a tin, but then again it is a very small fuel tank. So I mean, a tin that size would obviously do quite a reasonable sized motorcycle tank. Whether I go in and do another layer or not, I'm not sure. It says avoid pooling, because I thought maybe by building up, you know, a thick layer of it on the bottom of the tank, it might actually help things, but apparently that's not the case. You don't want it to pool. So what I'll do now, I'll keep moving that around a little bit. You can see in there it actually looks quite clean. It doesn't look too bad at all now. When you put the lid back on, I think to get a good seal it advises using a piece of plastic. So we'll try that and see if that stops it going off. It doesn't have a very long shelf life after you've opened it. I think it's about 2 years before, after it's opened. It's down to about 6 weeks, I think, or something like that. So it's all back together. We've got Coda Hammerite on the outside. I must admit, I'm not impressed with the finish. Hammerite is not what it used to be. I notice it's not made by Finnegan's anymore. It's a different formula, but it'll protect the surface. And if we have a look in there, we can see that's actually looking really quite clean now. So I think that'll do the trick. I'll put the new fuel tap on it. I've got some new springs for the propeller, so we can put it all back together and try it. It's not a wheelie bin. It's an outboard motor test bed. We just need to fill that up till it comes up about an inch past the top of the exhaust tube. Now when I ran her up on the test bed, it did run, and it ran for a few seconds or two, and I had to shut it down because if you see that, can you see there's a little hole? Well, that's where the water should be coming out. Effectively, it drags in water from back here, if you can see that, and then an impeller should be driving it up into the head, and it should come out of there to cool it, and it wasn't. Now I don't want to go cooking the engine, so we've had to shut that down. So it looks like now we've got a problem down here somewhere. We're going to have to take all this lot apart to find out what's going wrong. I did try putting an airline in that hole there and blowing compressed air through to see if it cleared anything. But I don't think it's a blockage. I think it's something more serious, like a hole in a pipe or a displaced pipe or something. Because when the compressed air came out, it actually came out through the exhaust as opposed to through the holes where it should be coming out. So we need to look at that. Now I've got the gearbox in pieces. The answer's pretty obvious straight away. If you look carefully down that hole, can you see there's a little round hole there? Well, the big hole, the triangular shaped one, that's where the exhaust goes out, and that little hole there is where the water comes from this side, which is in that housing there, up that there pipe, and down through that hole. And from there, it goes up through this pipe there, if you can see it. There we go, a copper pipe. And it goes up there, up through the exhaust tube and into the cylinder head. Now, looking at the position of that pipe and with the symptoms, it was obvious that that pipe was not in that hole, and that was what was causing the problem. So basically, the impeller's fine. If you have a look, you can see the impeller just there. Nothing wrong that end. So basically, it was just squirting water round and round, and it was just sending it straight out of the exhaust port. So it wasn't doing any good, no cooling. It's become very, very obvious that somebody's taken this machine apart who hadn't got a clue what they were doing. So I think in future I can't take anything for granted on it at all. That's a rabbit. Okay, so we're ready for the final moment of testing. If it isn't right now, I really don't know what's up with it. You notice we've got the water level about right, hopefully, so that should go out and come out that little hole. Fueled up, all good to go. Let's see if it runs.